everyone. Today I'm going to show you how you can install a root domain controller on a Windows Server 2012 computer. Just as a heads up, in this video I'm not going to explain what Active Directory is and the different things that makes up Active Directory. If you want to know more about it, you can search it on the internet. There are tons of information available out there about Active Directory. Alright, back to the agenda of this video. We are going to install a root domain controller on a Windows Server 2012 computer. So we pretty much have a simple scenario. We are going to build a Windows domain network for a startup company called Contoso. So to build a Windows domain network, we obviously need a domain controller to manage the domain. In our scenario, this is the first ever domain controller that we are going to build. That is the root domain controller for our domain. So this also means that we are building a brand new domain with no domain controller already existing. So basically, we are going to build a very simple domain. It contains a single domain, a single site, and a single forest. The domain name that we'll use in our scenario is called contoso.local. So in this video, we'll see how we can promote a server as a root domain controller in Windows Server 2012 operating system. So let us look at the computer that we are going to promote as a root domain controller. It is running Windows Server 2012 with the recommended hardware requirements. Let's look at the computer name. The computer name is, let's see. Alright, the computer name that we have set is DC01. Currently it is in workgroup. So as a best practice, we have configured our server to use a static IP address instead of a dynamic IP address. So the IP address that we have assigned is 192.168.10.1. It's IPv4 address, and the subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. Alright, so to create a new forest or a new domain, or to add a domain controller to an existing domain, we must install the Active Directory Domain Services role on a Windows Server 2012 computer, and then we'll run the Active Directory Domain Services configuration wizard. So let me show you how you can install the Active Directory Domain Services role, and I'll also show you how you can promote the server to a domain controller. Alright, so installing the Active Directory Domain Services role prepares the computer for the domain controller promotion. So to install the role, I've already logged on to the server as local administrator, which is required for the installation of ADDS role. So we have the server manager opened up, and let me go into the dashboard, and under the configure this local server, we have add roles and features. We'll click on it. Alright, so we have before you begin screen opened up, and it recommends you to verify certain things before you install any role services or features. Things such as administrator account should have a strong password, the server should be configured with a static IP address, and the server should be patched. We have met all the requirements, we have done all this, so we'll simply click next. Alright, on the select installation type window, We'll click on role-based or feature-based installation. That is the default option, so we'll click next. And on select destination server page, now you need to select the server on which you are going to install the Active Directory Domain Services role. So if you are managing another server from the Server Manager console, you have an option to select that remote server from this page. It means you can remotely install ADDS role on a server. And you also have an option to select a virtual hard disk instead of a server. So in our case, we are only managing the local server from the Server Manager console, that is DC01. So we'll click DC01 and click next. Alright, in select server roles window, we'll select the Active Directory Domain Services role. And as soon as I click on Active Directory Domain Services role, Add Roles and Features wizard opens up, and it is asking us to install additional roles and features. So we simply click Add Features to accept the dependencies and then click Next. Alright, we have the Select Features window opened up. By default, it will select the required features for Active Directory Domain Services role. So we'll simply leave the default selections and click Next. And we have the information window about the Active Directory Domain Services, displaying information about the role. Again, we'll click Next. Alright, so we are at the Confirm Installation Selections window, displaying the list of roles, role services or features that will be installed. So you have an option that says restart the destination server automatically if required. So you can restart the server automatically if it is required by the wizard for the changes to take effect. So we'll click on the option and we'll click on yes on the warning window, which says that the server will be automatically restarted without additional notifications. And you can also export configuration settings as an XML script, which documents the procedures performed by the wizard, which you can use to install the same configuration on another server using Windows PowerShell. And if required, you can specify an alternate source path for the location of an image file containing the software needed to install the selected roles and features. In our case, we are not going to do that. We'll simply click install to begin the installation. Now you can see the installation progress page opens up. You can see the wizard starting the installation. Now, one thing you can see is you have the close button, so you can close this wizard without interrupting running tasks. But if you would like to see the progress, you can view the task progress up on the top, or you can open this page again by clicking notification. Alright, now you can see that the installation of Active Directory Domain Services role is completed. And once the role has been installed, you can see a link that says promote this server to a domain controller, which is an additional step that is required to make this server as a domain controller. Alright, let me tell you something about dcpromo.exe. dcpromo.exe, which was there in the previous versions of Windows Server, has been deprecated in favor of the server manager domain controller installation process, but it is still possible to automate the installation by running the dcpromo.exe with an answer file, with an unattended file. So once you have installed the role, you can run the Active Directory Domain Services installation wizard by clicking this link. And the wizard procedure varies depending on what the function of the new domain controller will be. In our case, we are installing a forest root domain. Alright, now I'm going to show you how you can create a root domain controller. So after installing the ADDS role, we can go ahead and create a root domain controller for contoso.local. It is actually like creating a new forest. So when beginning a new ADDS installation, the first step is to create a new forest, which you do by creating the first domain in the forest, which is the forest root domain. So as we are creating the forest root domain, we'll select the add a new forest, and in the root domain name text box we'll type the name of the domain we would like to create. So we'll type contoso.local, which is our forest root domain. We'll click next. Alright, the domain controller options page opens up. Here you can select the forest functional level and domain functional level. So if you plan to add domain controllers running previous versions of Windows Server to this forest, you need to select the previous versions of the forest functional level from the drop-down list. Similarly, if you plan to add domain controllers running previous versions of the Windows Server to this domain, you need to select the previous Windows version you plan to install from the domain functional level drop down list. In our case, we'll leave the defaults because we'll not be adding any domain controllers running previous versions of Windows servers to this domain, and also we don't have any domain controllers already running previous versions of the Windows servers. So if you don't have a DNS server on your network, you can leave the DNS name system server checkbox selected. If you have a DNS server on the network and the domain controller is configured to use that server for DNS services, then you need to uncheck this box. In our case, we don't have a running DNS server, so we would like to make this server as a DNS server as well. So we'll check the box. You can also see other two options, which is global catalog and read-only domain controller. Those options are unavailable because the first domain controller in a new forest must be a global catalog server, and it cannot be a read-only domain controller. So because of that, this server is going to be a global catalog server, and it's not going to be a read-only domain controller. You'll type the password you want to use for directory services restore mode. Confirm the password and click next. The DNS option page opens up with a warning that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the DNS service is not installed yet. You can ignore this warning and click next. Now the wizard will check if there's already a NetBIOS name exists for the domain name that we have specified. So since it cannot find an existing one, it will display the NetBIOS equivalent of the domain name that we have specified. So you can see the NetBIOS name is Katoso. If you would like to, you can modify the NetBIOS name, but in our case, we'll leave the default and we'll click Next. In the path section, you can specify the path for your database folder, log file, sysvol, if desired, but it is recommended that you save these files on a different hard disk for redundancy. In our case, we leave the defaults and click Next. Okay, you can now review the configuration options before we click Next. You can also view the PowerShell script for promoting this server as a domain controller by clicking the view script. So when you click view script, you can see the PowerShell script which is used to promote this server as a domain controller. Alright, we'll click next. Alright, so the prerequisite check page opens up and it will perform a number of environment tests to determine if the system can function as a domain controller. So here you can see that all prerequisite checks passed successfully, so we can click install to begin the installation. Alright, now the wizard creates the new forest and configures the server to function as a domain controller. Alright, now it has to restart the server, so we'll click close again, and it's restarting the server. Alright, I'm back at the login screen, so I'm gonna log back in to the domain controller. Now with the forest root domain controller in place, you can go ahead and create additional domain controllers in this domain, or you can add new domains to the forest. But before that, you may need to check and configure some additional DNS server settings. Let me show you that. I'm going to open up Server Manager and I'll click on Tools and I'll click DNS. Alright, now you can see you have a forward lookup zone. Let's check the properties. Alright, I want this to replicate to all domain controllers, so I'll click that and I'll click OK, and the dynamic updates is set to secure only, which is good. Let me click apply. Now you have to create a reverse lookup zone which is recommended. So let me show you how you can create a reverse lookup zone. So I'll right click on reverse lookup zone and click new zone and click next on the welcome screen. I'll click, it's gonna be a primary zone and the zone will be stored in the active directory. So I'll click next. Again, I want the zone to replicate to all domain controllers in the domain, so I'll click this option and I'll click next, and it's gonna be a IPv4 reverse lookup zone. So I'll click next, and I'll type in the network ID, which is 192.168.10. I'll click next, and I'm only going to allow secure dynamic updates, which is recommended for Active Directory. Click next, and I'll click finish, and let me click on the zone. I'll I'll create a pointer record for the domain controller that we have created. I'll go into the forward lookup zone. I'll go into the forward lookup zone of contoso.local. I'll select DC01. I'll click OK. Click OK. This looks good. Let me update the server data files. Clear the cache. Alright, we have created a forest root domain controller. Thanks for watching.